I'm speaking to Jeni Crane from Yum Nutrition in this episode. She is a nutritional therapist specialising in female hormones, and I've actually been working with her this year. She shares her own story of finding support for her PCOS through nutrition, how our hormones fluctuate throughout our menstrual cycle, and we also discuss why so many women are suffering with chronic illnesses and stress and what's actually going on in our bodies. We chat about how much we can actually do to support ourselves that isn't just relying on medication. And a quote from Jeni's website that I love is, "We are entitled to good health, not just an absence of illness." I hope you enjoy the episode. Thank you for tuning in to the Calm Your Nervous System podcast, where you will learn to regulate your nervous system, not just calm it. I'm your host, Jeni Adams, and I'm a somatic coach who has recovered from debilitating ME and trauma. Alongside my guest experts, I'm here to share tips, stories, and debunk jargon, what is somatics anyway, about how you can regulate your nervous system so you don't have to live with chronic illness, burnout, or debilitating trauma for the rest of your life. A joyful life is possible. So, hi Jeni, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. And just for a little bit of context, we have been working together. Well, we've known each other, a year or so? We're local, aren't we?
Yeah.
We've been working together for a few months. And if you listen to episode 7, I've actually mentioned you with how you've been supporting me personally with my own hormones and things over the last few months, and especially with my ADHD and potential, I don't know if it's PMDD, luteal stuff anyway. But yeah, you've been really helpful with not only giving me support for my own body, my own dietary requirements, but also giving the data of what's actually going on. So thank you for all of that. And thank you for coming on. So first of all, I'd love to hear a little bit about your story and what got you into the work that you got into.
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for having me on. And it's been a real pleasure to work with you and to do a bit more of a deep dive into what's going on for you. And as you know, I'm a big fan of data, and I'm a big fan of knowing, I guess, the why and, what is actually going on within our bodies. And I suppose it was that desire, that thirst for knowledge that really kind of led me into nutrition. So if we whiz all the way back in our time machines to 2002, I'd been suffering with dysregulated hormones myself, although that's not what I knew it to be at the time, for a couple of years. I had been, as with many women, on various methods of hormonal contraception for the vast majority of my teenage years and into my 20s, and hadn't really given too much thought to it. Just kind of thought of it as, a means to have birth control. And when it came to a point where, and I think a lot of women go through this, where I wanted to kind of see what my body was doing actually behind the scenes without any hormonal involvement, like what were my hormones doing? It was more, I guess, out of curiosity than anything, and like a desire to get artificial hormones out of my body. And I was 20 when I came off of the Depo-Provera injection. That was my final foray into hormonal contraception. So I'd done oral contraceptive pill, never did the implant, but then went straight onto the Provera and had probably about 3 years of that injectable, and found that worked really well for me. I was terrible on the pill because I'd always forget. So the injection for me was like a bit of a no-brainer. I hadn't even considered things like the coil, because at that time, when I was in my teens, they kind of said to me, well, it's not really that advised for women who haven't had children, can be very painful, and that put me off. So I was all for ease. So I came off of the Provera injection, and they said to me, well, you're going to get your fertility back pretty much straight away. So you need to use barrier methods of contraception. Just be very careful, because it can be pretty much instant as soon as the Provera is out of your system. And your periods should be back within 3 to 6 months and back to their normal regularity. So I waited the 3 to 6 months. Nothing happened. Waited another 9 months. Waited to 12 months. Still nothing had happened. And I was increasingly feeling like I just had constant PMS. So I was feeling frustrated, bloated, like my clothes didn't fit, all of the bit that, you mentioned as well within the work that you do within your podcast and also your Instagram stories about the luteal phase, just general despair, lack of confidence, hunger, all of those horrible, horrible symptoms. But that was constant for all of those months.
Wow.
12 months went by. I went back to the GP and I was like, come on now, this is crazy. This is ridiculous. It's not meant to take this long. And they said, no, just be patient. For some women, they just don't get their cycles back straight away. And actually, they encouraged me to wait up until 24 months. And for 2 years of not having any menstrual periods, actually, we kind of take it for granted how much our periods make us feel like women. And
wow.
how much of a window into our health they are, and I know that a lot of women find their periods very much an inconvenience and messy and frustrating and painful. But actually, I really missed mine. I really wanted it to come back because I really felt very abnormal without it. So I started going through various investigations with the GP. They finally listened after a lot of begging and they started to do blood work. Obviously, that blood work must have triggered, abnormal ranges because they then sent me off for a scan. And I was really unaware of what was going on at the time because I'd never known anybody else to go through these kind of investigations. I didn't have lots of female friends going through this. And people weren't really, I don't think, around me as open as we are now with social media and everything talking about, GP visits and hormones and all of that. So I went off for this scan, had a consultation with the gynecologist at the hospital, and they said, well, we'd like to tell you, we found the root cause of why you haven't got any menstrual cycle at the moment. You've got PCOS, polycystic ovary syndrome. And I was sat there and I'd taken my best friend with me and she was a bit of a medical encyclopedia sort of person. And she said, oh, I knew that that's what you had. And I thought, well, I didn't know that's what I had. I have never heard of it before and had no idea what it meant for me. So, very short appointments that you get with these specialists. And as with a lot of gynecologists, he was a man. So he had an understanding of what he was telling me, obviously specialism in what he was telling me, but not really on how it was landing for me. So he just sat there and he rattled off that I stood a 50% higher chance of getting diabetes, a 50% higher chance of getting cardiovascular disease, that I might have problems with my fertility, and actually it was quite likely, but that they wouldn't look into any of that until such time as I was ready to start trying for a family. Oh, and here you go, here's your prescription. You need to be on metformin for the rest of your life. And I kind of sat there really shell-shocked, 22 years of age, never had really any health problems apart from when I was a much younger child, which is a different story, and didn't really know what to do. And I just kind of sat there and thought, well, this doesn't sound right, that it's just, here you go, here's all of these risk factors, just stay on this medication, there's nothing you can do for yourself. So I asked the question. I said, is there anything that I can do to help my situation through what I'm eating or lifestyle or whatever? And he was like, categorically no. There's nothing you can do to help yourself. Here's the list of some websites that are charities that may be able to guide you further. And there we go. I was kind of pushed out of my appointment and left there with a lot of confusion and uncertainty about what this all meant for me, but also a little bit of bloody mindedness at the same time, because I thought, well, I'm not just taking that. That just sounds like it's half baked and there's got to be more to it than that. So I went off and did my own research, and the internet in 2002 was nowhere near what it is now. It was basically all forums and, very, very limited. But I went on the websites for the different charities and just kind of explained a bit more about actually what was going on in my body in terms of like the biomedical side of things, biochemical sort of actions that were going on in the body. But I was still kind of really confused as to what I could do myself. So I started doing my research and I started reading as much as I could into it and started using myself as a bit of a human guinea pig. Now, at the time, I was 22. I'd just finished college. My diet was awful, is fair to say. So typical student diet, the cheapest stuff, takeaways, late nights, drinking, smoking, the whole shebang, like everything that is disruptive to hormones that you can imagine. So it didn't take much to make improvements, to be fair.
Oh, I bet, yeah.
Over the years, it was really a case of like getting those little 1% in. So going after the obvious stuff, getting my sleep on track, dialing in, the type of movement that I was doing for my body. So I was at the time running all the time. I was doing 5Ks, 10Ks and half marathons. Didn't realize what I was doing to my body by doing that, and that really I needed to be doing weight training. Didn't realize that the food choices I was making was driving my symptoms. And at that time, I'd been also under the GP for adult onset acne, which nobody ever drew the dots between the two conditions. Nobody ever said, well, this is the reason, now we found out you've got PCOS. That's the reason that you've got adult onset acne. It's all part of the same picture. They kind of treated it separately. And all told, I was on antibiotics for 7 years for that. Low dose antibiotics every single day, which these days we now know how detrimental that is.
7 years.
7 years. And it got to the stage where it wasn't really helping. And unfortunately, I'd go back and do it differently if I knew what I know now. But unfortunately, I chose the route of having Roaccutane treatment, which is toxic doses of vitamin A, to encourage your skin to go through this whole expedited kind of shedding cycle. And it did cure it, to be fair. But if I'd known that the reason why was because of my PCOS, and that actually by addressing that, I could have, not exposed my body to antibiotics and then this toxic vitamin A. So, I was under the care of the dermatologist at the time for my acne. I was 2.5 stone overweight. I was really depressed. Not just because of being overweight and feeling, like I wasn't really in my own body, but also because of all of these hormonal changes that were going on in my body. I actually had my cycles come back pretty much straight away after starting the metformin, which was great. That's fantastic. It sorted that issue. And actually by doing that, it started to regulate my cycles, because I actually started to have a regular bleed, albeit at the time I wasn't ovulating and I didn't know what to look for at the time anyway. So I was still really super low on that progesterone. So still had the same kind of mood issues that I was having before I had no cycles. So I started that process, went through over the course of 8 years, really, a process of dialing in my diet, dialing in the way that I move my body, started to put my symptoms one by one into remission. And then I was like, well, why am I even taking this metformin anymore? I wonder what it'd be like to not have it anymore. So one day I just stopped, and I thought that I was going to have lots and lots of really strong sugar cravings and carb cravings, because that's another piece that came with it, because I was so insulin resistant. And actually, because I'd done all the work in the background, I stopped the medication and nothing negative happened. No changes, which is fantastic. But then I had this kind of aha moment where I was thinking, well, if that's true for me with my diagnosis of PCOS, which is, it's really life-changing when you have that diagnosis in that moment, but it's something that you learn to live with, and a lot of women, struggle with it and have it. It's got to be true for so many other conditions that are just dished out, kind of willy-nilly, these diagnoses, because it's so matter of course for these specialists to give out these diagnoses that actually, they reel it off in a patter. But, it's the first time that that person has heard that diagnosis, and it can be like really life-shattering, because you don't know what's going on in your body. You feel like your power's been taken away from you, and now you've got this label. And this is the thing with, really any condition, but in particular, I think hormonal conditions, we can get very wrapped up in the label, and we can start really associating very strongly with that. But actually, that's just giving us clues as to what is going on behind the scenes in terms of our symptomatic presentation, and also clues as to what needs to change within our bodies to affect those symptoms. So that journey brought me to looking into nutrition and looking into it in a bit more of a serious way. Started doing some online courses which don't necessarily give you anything in terms of certificates or anything like that, but just to kind of get my head back into learning. And then actually it was my mum who gave me a little flyer for the College of Naturopathic Medicine that had been left in her work one day. And it said, have you thought of a career as a nutritional therapist? And I thought, well, I haven't even heard what a nutritional therapist is. I didn't even know they existed. And then I thought, well, I would have loved to have gone to see a nutritional therapist when I was struggling with my hormones. And then I thought, well, actually, no, I wouldn't have, because it would have meant that I hadn't have gone through that journey myself. And I think because I had all those hard fought wins, I recognise now how long it can take for somebody to find all their own information, and that it needs to basically be a part-time job, really, to find all your own information. And it made me really appreciate what a nutritional therapist can do in terms of fast-tracking that process. So it was a very vocational course. I went along to an open evening, and then 3 months later, there I was sat in a classroom, first time in education for goodness knows how long, probably like 15 to 20 years, and embarked on the course. It was a 3-year course that ran alongside my full-time work in corporate. I had an 18-year stint in recruitment. It was crazy in terms of the amount of work that we're expected to turn out in that time. But there wasn't a moment during that time that I regretted it, thought about quitting, thought about, it isn't worth it, giving up all of my weekends and evenings to study and all of that, because I had this real kind of fire burning in me that there was this injustice going on where people were just getting these diagnoses, becoming disempowered, and then having to just live with it, basically, deal with it and stay on medication for the rest of their lives. And I really wanted to be able to give a level of hope to people where they can actually take back the power into their own hands through the things that they do just as part of their normal day-to-day, and that it didn't need to be complex, it didn't need to come with side effects, it didn't need to be something that's super challenging. It could be just optimizations in their life to help them get their lives back on track and to take back that control. And I thought that was the most important thing, to give people the power to govern their own health rather than feel like they're, just part of a cohort of people with a diagnosis that are all on, a medication for the rest of their lives.
Yeah, it sounds like you really found your thing, and obviously that journey has taken you to that place. But yeah, there is definitely something in, having to work some of this stuff out yourself. I guess it's not necessarily that there's not help out there, but sometimes it's for you to find it in your own time, and whether that's with the support of a professional or whether that's maybe I can think outside of what the doctors have told me.
Yeah.
And I think something you said in there, the injustice of not having this information, because everything you have just shared, the kind of 2 or 3 big things that are sticking out to me is, again, it's this injustice of being fobbed off by a male doctor and just, oh, here's a diagnosis, off you go. And the words that you use, and I don't know if they use these words, we're pleased to say it's PCOS. And yeah, how that must land to just, off you go. And also just the injustice of how many of us don't understand our menstrual cycles, and that we fluctuate and different stuff happens during different times of the month. And it's not just, we should be ashamed and, you go crazy when you're on your period and the rest of the month is like normal. It's not that at all. And I'd love to hear you speak about that in a moment. And also the other injustice of nutrition, because so much of what you have taught me over the last few months, and I would say, I have recovered from ME, CFS and chronic burnout from ADHD as well, through changing my diet. For me, it was getting rid of dairy. So there's a level of understanding, but from what you've told me over the last few months, my mind has been blown. There's just so much how different things interact with stuff. And, I think I've described some of my luteal cravings and things, and you're just like, yeah, that's probably low progesterone, I think you said. Or you told me symptoms. I'm like, she's in my head. What's going on? So yeah, there is just such a injustice. And, for everybody listening, thank you, because you're obviously here to educate yourself and to learn more, and to not necessarily just take the words of the doctor and take the life sentence. It doesn't always have to be such a life sentence, does it?
This is it. And I think that, we have to give the medical profession their dues, their mode of training, the school of thought that they come from is that they're taught to look at clinical presentations and recommend a course of action that's within that country's guidance. So for us, it's the NICE guidelines. And that course of action is, generally different types of drugs to see which is most well tolerated, which has the least side effects. And, with any drug, we get some side effects. It's just how well our body deals with those side effects or how acutely we feel those side effects. Working through a series of those, to find the optimal drug with the least side effects, and or a referral to somebody who's a specialist in that area. And really, I say this to a lot of my clients as well. When we go into the GP and we expect something else other than that, we will always be disappointed because our medical system isn't set up to sit there and take, for example, like a 2-hour case history. Our medical system isn't set up to look at you as an entire person and connect the dots between all of the different symptoms, like, my acne and my PCOS, for example. They were treated by dermatology, they were treated by endocrinology, and never the twain shall meet. Our medical system is set up to be able to provide medications or referrals, and that's actually about it. And so when we want to go past that, and when we want to look into, okay, what else can I do to make this medication work better for me? I'm not saying that medications are all demonized. Absolutely not. Medications in their right place have a great impact on people, life-changing, life-saving in a lot of cases. And so don't get me wrong, I'm not anti-medication, but what I am anti is over-medicalizing symptoms which can be affected by somebody's lifestyle and nutrition really quite quickly, and without that intervention of medication, without making them reliant on that particular medication. Because a lot of the time we're just masking a situation with a medication. We're not actually going to the root cause of it and going, right, okay, well, this is a symptom of a number of different imbalances. This is our body telling us something. This is the whispers of our body. And I'm sure you talk about the whispers and the shouts. We want to listen to the whispers before we have to listen to the shouts, before our body is shouting at us. And, all of these things like hormonal disruptions are whispers from our body to say something isn't right, but you need to go to the right practitioner to go to the root cause. Because, nutritional therapy, functional medicine, we're all taught to look at the person like a tree, essentially, and that the branches and the leaves are the symptoms, they're the presentations, that's what you can see outward. The person is the tree, but the roots are the root causes. And whether that's, a psychosocial root cause, whether it's a nutrient deficiency, whether it's a parasite, whether it's dysregulated gut bacteria, whatever it might be, it's generally not one thing. And it's generally not a case where somebody could walk in, see you for 10 minutes and go away with a solution. It's a coaching process. And, when you're asking somebody to change aspects of their diet or lifestyle, that's got to be done on a change timeline. That person has to have support to do that, the how as well as the what. And when you're looking at nutrients and food and lifestyle, it's not a case of you change one thing and then the next week you feel instantly better. It's a cumulative effect and it takes some time. And I think our culture, certainly our Western culture, the States and the UK in particular, are very much almost like railroaded into the mindset of we want an instant fix. We don't necessarily want to do the work behind the scenes. And, with so many things where we want lasting change, the instant fix masks the situation. But actually, we need to do the work in order to have that lasting change, in order to not have to deal with that over and over again, or to have to take medication for the rest of our lives.
Yeah, because otherwise it just comes back. And I know for myself, I've known I've had ADHD for years, but I only got diagnosed about 2 or 3 weeks ago. And I wanted to get diagnosed because I was curious about trying medication. And that's been a very much a thought through, informed choice I made. But when I had my assessment, they basically said to me, ADHD is caused by a lack of dopamine. We'll give you stimulants. They'll increase your dopamine. End of. There's other things that you can do. We can change your lifestyle. What's going on in your nervous system? What are you eating? What does your life look like? How's work? Are you stressed? Like none of that. It was just, there's a lack of dopamine. We'll give you dopamine. Done. And I'm pleased I've done the work I've done because, I can advocate for myself and kind of take that with a pinch of salt. I'm like, okay, well, I'm here. I give me the pills. But, I am also very much aware, if that's your first port of call, and I've been on these meds for a few weeks now, that if I just went straight into the medication and hadn't done any holistic work, any coaching, any strategy stuff, any understanding my nervous system, any of that support work, then I really don't know. I just don't think they do much. They might quieten my mind down a bit, but not like the root cause hasn't been addressed. Yeah. And so often with ADHD, it's trauma linked. So giving you a pill that increases your dopamine levels ain't really going to do much to your trauma. And I think for most people listening, whether it's ADHD or chronic fatigue or fibromyalgia, you know, any of these sorts of conditions that I would imagine most of you listening have something or know someone with one of those sorts of things. They're not just, oh, it's a deficiency in such and such. And I see a lot of the time, especially in the ME/CFS community, there's a desperate seeking out for like, what's the like pathogen, what's the marker of this? And once we figure that out, we can get a pill to fix it and it goes away. And it's just, you know, come at me with the shit. I'm sure I'll get some. But for anyone that has recovered, they have not found a magic pill. They've had to make some serious changes in their life and look at, you know, themselves through a holistic, full body approach. So it is complex, but as you said, you know, our NHS just isn't set up for that. So, you know, I also hear, and it sounds like we've both been through this, where we've taken our symptoms to the medical community and just not really been seen because it's complex. You know, we're human beings and everything's connected. So, yeah, there can be a reason sometimes that you don't feel heard by your doctor, but there is support out there. Yeah, there's a lot of it.
And it doesn't have to be either or. That's the thing. I think that lots of people think, okay, well, if I get to the end of my medical support, that's when I'll seek out. I hate the word alternative practitioner because, again, that indicates that we're either or. But a practitioner who's going to look at it with a different lens.
Complementary.
It can be alongside. And, you know, like you say about your medication, you know, absolutely that medication has landed with you in a different way because you're in a different space, because your internal environment is different, but also because you've gone through the process of working through, you know, what are your little dopamine hits? You know, what is the way that you need to structure your life? What is the way that you need to work? All of those kind of things. Whereas if it's just a case of, right, I'm just going to take this and it's going to fix everything, actually all of those things remain unfixed. It's just less hard to deal with the day to day. But then as soon as you take it out, you know, those things are still there. And I know a lot of people who've used ADHD meds to get through university, or they might get through the first couple of years of a new job or something like that. And then they come off their medication because they've then got their rhythm, their routine, and they've worked out what works for them. And, you know, similarly to myself, you know, with the metformin, once I'd put the things right in the background that were out of balance, I could take the medication out and actually no negative issues. There was no problem with removing it because actually I didn't need any more insulin sensitization that the metformin was giving me. So I think, you know, it's so multifactorial. You know, we are onions essentially, and you've got to peel back all those layers of the onion. And, you know, it's never one thing. With any chronic illness, it's never one thing, or I should say even chronic condition as well. You know, which I wouldn't call PCOS necessarily an illness, it's a condition. You know, it's multifactorial, it's never one thing. And you can draw up a timeline and work out what the sequence of events were that led to, you know, that coming on, or that condition being diagnosed, or that those symptoms becoming present. And that helps in a way because you can then almost reverse out of it. But if you're just thinking about it's just a deficiency of X, you know, and everybody who has ADHD is just because this deficiency of this one thing, then you're barking up the wrong tree. You know, that's more of this one size fits all and a panacea pill, which, you know, everybody is so unique and everybody's genetics are unique and biochemical individuality. So we've got to start treating people like that in the sense of empowering them to look at their own health, but also having these very nuanced and tailored processes instead of trying to shoehorn people down a route of of, trial of medications, referrals, that kind of thing.
Yeah. And I think that's, again, something that is missing, is that tailored approach. But, there is support, definitely. There's definitely support
and it is
out
coming.
there.
Lifestyle medicine, the likes of Dr. Rangan Chatterjee, he's an NHS doctor, but he's starting to really roll that out. He's actually teaching a module within University of Chester of nutrition, which is such a leap forward really for the medical community, because the reason why they don't advise on it is because they don't get training on it. So therefore it's a massive blind spot. So they stay in their zone of genius. It's why I don't advise on medications, because I haven't had any training in them.
Yeah.
But there is hope with that, because then once we start to have that filtering through our medical community, they'll start to have an appreciation of how much nutrition has an impact, rather than it being something completely separate that's not even looked at as part of that person's presentation.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. I didn't know that about him. Obviously, I've listened to his podcasts and things, but I wonder if they're training doctors on trauma as well now, and not just broken bone trauma, but, actual full body emotional trauma, if that's what you want to call it.
I'd like to think that we'll have, in the same way as we've got like menopause leads or menopause champions in each GP surgery now, that we'll actually start to have that, people who are trauma informed.
Yeah, because it is really needed in the medical world. So yeah, I'm sure there's so much being spoken about at the moment, and we can see what happens when we don't get this. That it's almost like an easy win for the NHS to do a couple of these things. It's like, oh, okay, maybe now we stop seeing so many of the repeated people and patterns and things coming in. Absolutely. So yeah, I would love to hear a couple of things from you. Could you talk a little bit about what happens in our menstrual cycles with our hormones? Because you've explained this to me before, and especially with my own symptoms, I have an understanding of we have like four phases and how we feel in those phases. But you've really helped me understand a little bit of the why. Like, why do I always feel so shit in my luteal phase? And also, is there anything that can be done to support each of those phases?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm reading an amazing book at the moment, which I thoroughly recommend everybody to read. It's been on my reading list for a long time, and it's called The XX Brain. And it's about female brains and how they are very, very different to male brains. And the reason why is because on the X chromosome, we have 198 genes. And on the Y chromosome, you have 1,098, I should say. So women have about 1,000 more genes than men. And it doesn't come as a surprise, because there's a lot of intricate processes going on in a female's body that doesn't go on in a male's body, in particular hormonal fluctuations. So men will have basically a menstrual cycle in a day. They have this hormonal fluctuation through their day. And a woman will usually have it between 28 and 32 days, there or thereabouts. There are outliers to that, shorter and longer cycles. But broad brush speaking, that's how long our menstrual cycles are. And that's from the first day of our bleed all the way through to the day before our bleed, when we reset again to 1. And the big influence, we talk about estrogen so much, and, the perimenopause, menopause community have really brought that to the front of conversations within the media about estrogen depletions during perimenopause, but we don't really talk about it during our menstrual years, during our menstrual cycles, and, the impact that it has on us. And we're very much encouraged as females to live in a male world, essentially. There is the song, obviously, A Man's World, and then, it can't be diminished how much we are actually trying to shoehorn ourselves into a male world, because the expectation is we'll have the same energy output, we'll have the same focus, we'll have the same ability to problem solve, etc., all the way through the month. And actually what we know is that dramatically changes within different parts of your cycle, whether you're aware of it or not. It is changing. And some people experience really intense changes throughout their cycle, and others less so. But what we know is that when we have the menstrual bleed, the trigger for that is a plummeting of both hormones, estrogen and progesterone, to trigger the release of the endometrial lining, which has been building up during that luteal phase. And the reason that happens is essentially because an egg has not been fertilized. So if we go from ovulation, it sounds like a bit of a weird place to start in the menstrual cycle, but really that kind of gives us a bit of a starting point from a evolutionary perspective, really, because the whole reason why we have menstrual cycles is to procreate. And so ovulation is where we're releasing that egg from one ovary or the other. And we get a nice spike in our estrogen, progesterone. At around that time, we'll probably feel the most confident that we feel for the whole of the month. Some people find that it's more in their follicular phase, the first few days, that they might not feel so confident. And then as they get towards ovulation, they're really feeling their best. And of course, sex drive increases, temperature increases. And actually, interestingly, our taste in men changes as well. So we're much more likely to look at very unsuitable suitors during ovulation than we are as we enter our luteal phase. And, you know, as we enter that phase, we look for more protectors. So we're looking for those very virile men, obviously men with very strong secondary sexual characteristics. During that time of ovulation, we're looking for, you know, men with strong jaws and broad shoulders and all of this, a very traditional way of looking at strong genetics, essentially. And then once that ovulation period starts to wane, sort of 3 days really after ovulation, the body starts to sense that that egg is not going to be fertilized. So we start to then go into the luteal phase where hormones are starting to drop. And it's that drop in those hormones that make us feel rubbish, essentially. So, you know, in the same way as when a woman starts to go through perimenopause, she starts to maybe get thinner hair, skin quality might change, might become less sort of plump and less vibrant, less healthy looking. She might feel more fatigued. She might feel more self-conscious. And you can also see during that luteal phase more bloating occurring and also digestive dysfunction as well. Lots of women start to notice that they might get a bit constipated during that time, leading into then their period where they might experience a bit more diarrhea. So then we get that trigger of the hormones coming right back down to baseline, and that triggers the shedding of that endometrial lining, which is essentially the lining of the womb, which has been put in place by the body during that follicular phase and into ovulation in readiness for that egg to be implanted. And then when we're then in our bleed phase, a lot of women find that there's a sense of relief at that point because hormones will start to be building again in the background. So that can be almost like a sense of pent up emotion and aggression and, you know, other emotions that might come up for them in that period of time up until their bleed. And then it's almost like the day of the bleed happening is actually a bit of a release and a bit of a relief on that woman's body as well.
Oh, yes.
So there's huge changes. And in the background, we've got FSH and LH that are influencing those changes. And all of this is being governed by our pituitary gland. So the reason why I touch upon that at the moment is because in a moment, I'm sure we'll start to talk about a little bit of stress and overwhelm if we've got some time to. And the pituitary gland is very much impacted in that process as well. So you can see how it can become busied doing one job rather than the other.
Yeah, and that's so interesting. I mean, that's only been something I've been aware of the last probably couple of years, is actually what's going on with those hormone fluctuations. And to just understand, okay, maybe I feel as rubbish as I do because my estrogen's just kind of dropped off. And, you know, and is there a link between estrogen and dopamine, which again would then link to us ADHDers who have, I think, slightly lower dopamine thresholds?
Yeah, absolutely. So the reason why I talk about the XX brain is because it very much talks about the influence of estrogen on the brain, and in particular, dopamine, serotonin, and norepinephrine or noradrenaline, we call it in the UK. And it has a huge impact on our mood, on our motivation, on our ability to stay to task, focus, even desire for, you know, platonic relationships, or the desire to actually pull away from those is mediated by those hormones, which are also neurotransmitters as well. So this is why you can absolutely see that throughout a woman's menstrual cycle, her ADHD is going to be impacted for sure.
Oh, yes.
But also in perimenopause, as soon as you start to lose that protective effect of estrogen, and estrogen is so important that every single cell of the body has an estrogen receptor on it.
Wow.
That is how important it is. So when we start to lose that estrogen, then you can see how dopamine, serotonin, and noradrenaline are really negatively impacted. And then we start going through these kind of dopamine chasing habits, essentially, which tend to be quite self-destructive because they're quick dopamine. They're not long-term dopamine, and they're not necessarily sustainable habits either. So it's really important to guard that estrogen. And lots of people think that they can't really have an impact on their hormones, both, during their menstrual cycles, but also in perimenopause. But we absolutely can. So we've got that production going on from the ovaries. We need to have good ovary health. And we also need to have good levels of certain nutrients, key nutrients, to regulate those signals that are going from the pituitary gland to signal how much of these hormones we need. But also we really, really need to guard our adrenal glands. And I would say for any women that are listening to this who are mid-30s, 40s, maybe haven't started perimenopause yet, I'd strongly encourage you to think about stress and life load, because if you can deal with stress and life load now and put things in place to be able to buffer yourself from the effects of, day-to-day life and all the plate spinning that goes on, you'll have a much easier ride through perimenopause because of what I'm about to talk about. So guarding stress levels in mid-30s, late 30s and 40s is so key for women to not go through a really rough ride with their menopause.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's really interesting. So, because one thing, I see a lot is the symptoms of what's happened when we have been living in the man's world and we're trying to do all the things and we're chronically stressed and burnt out. And, I can see how especially undiagnosed and unmanaged ADHD can turn into things like ME, CFS. I see that journey, and I understand, there's stuff going on in the body and especially the nervous system as well. But what's going on with our hormones and like our endocrine system when we are under chronic stress? Because I know this thing, allostatic load, there's only so much we can run on that. So yeah, what's going on and what can we do?
Yeah, you're right, absolutely right. And you were talking about it, I think, in one of your previous podcasts about your stress bucket or your glass. And we can only deal with a certain amount. And we kind of think about stress as being in particular areas of our life. It's either work stress or family stress. But stress is really everything that goes on with us. So it can be work stress and family stress, absolutely. Relationships. It can be the stress from your environment. If you're living somewhere where you're near to fields and they're constantly spraying pesticides, you're in a house which has mold, you're maybe in a living situation which is really toxic for you. We can have stress related to the stories that we tell ourselves, our own internal environment, and also, lack of nutrition causes stress in our body. When we're thinking about, our sleep habits these days, they cause massive stress because there's a certain amount of bravado about getting by on 4 to 6 hours sleep and 5 a.m. club and all of that kind of thing. And also exercise. We think about exercise as being, it's really important. We've really got to do it. It's constantly drummed into us about the health benefits. But actually, if you're doing the wrong kind of exercise, like I was, running myself into the ground on top of a really stressful job, on top of traveling everywhere, on top of, it was counterproductive and I didn't even know it. I was adding cortisol on top of already elevated cortisol. I was really battling with that as part of my PCOS. My PCOS is adrenal PCOS. So I already had higher levels of cortisol. So running was not the best thing for me to do, but I didn't know that. And so it's choosing your activity wisely as well, rather than just doing it because you think that you have to. So, when we're going through a response to stress, what should happen is what happens, for example, on the savannah. So when we think about a zebra, for example, walking along the savannah, it is under threat all the time. It's a prey animal, so its eyes are on the side and it's always looking around. Even when it's eating, it's always looking around, and you'll notice that they go head to tail, don't they, in their herds to be able to watch out for each other. And they spot a lion, and the lion is predating them, is stalking them, and they might then go on an all-out sprint. So they're running for their life at this moment, literally running for their lives. But then, lions are lazy, aren't they? If they don't manage to catch them within the first few bits of a chase, then they'll give up. So the lion gives up, the lion goes away, and instantly the zebra's got its head back down and it's eating. It's not there going, oh my goodness, there was a lion. That's really terrible. What happened if the lion comes back again? What happens if the lion's after my whole family? What happens if that lion sends me an email that I have to read, but that's our life. That boss sends you an email and you might then mull that over. You might think, oh my goodness, what does that mean? Does that mean my job is under threat? Oh, what happens if everybody at work hates me? And we start to catastrophize and we start to get, email apnea. We're holding our breath whilst we're reading our emails, or, a partner shouts at you instantly. You'll be on alert. You'll be experiencing high levels of stress. But it doesn't end after the stress goes away. And that's the problem with our lives compared to the animals on the savannah, because we have that, and then we have a commute home and, there's an accident on the motorway and we're trapped in traffic for ages, or, we get a bill through and you think, oh my goodness, how am I going to pay this? Or, you've got to go and see your in-laws and actually you don't get on with them that well, or, you're having problems with your partner, or you're thinking about, oh God, I've got to exercise, I've got to lose weight, blah, 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 whatever it might be. It's not just one thing and then we can go back to eating our food really quietly and naturally and with no worries. And, we get this stimulation that happens that goes on from the brain down, basically. So, when we first sense that stressor, the amygdala, which is our safety sensor, essentially, is picking up, right, okay, this is a threat to us. It could be a danger on our lives. And your body does not know the difference. I'm sure you've mentioned this lots and lots of times before. Your body does not know the difference between a saber-toothed tiger hunting you down and an email from that person who you really don't want to get an email from, or, a raised voice or whatever it might be. There's very quickly then a signal to the hypothalamus, which is your command center. Your command center goes, right, okay, we've got this signal that there's a danger. So what are we going to do? We're going to actually send a signal to the pituitary gland that we need to get out of this situation. So the pituitary gland is responsible for creating all the hormones. And the pituitary gland sends the signals, the first set of hormones, and also neurotransmitters as well, to encourage our body to actually start bringing action into play here. So we then got that signal that goes to our adrenals from the pituitary from the pituitary gland, should I say, to signal to the adrenals, right, we need some adrenaline because we need to get the hell out of here. We need some noradrenaline probably. And if it goes on for a long period of time, we also need some cortisol, because actually we want some anti-inflammatory situation going on here that will deal with, any inflammation that might be going on. And would be dealing with sort of wounds that might be sustained in this attack on our body, essentially. So adrenaline, perfect. We want adrenaline to get out of a danger situation. But really, if we're sat at our desk, what good is that adrenaline doing? It's not. It's utilizing, our resources to create those hormones. It's mobilizing sugar into our bloodstream, which is another podcast, another time, talking about, elevated blood sugar levels. But it's trying to get us out of that danger situation. It's making our eyes widen. It's making our breathing speed up. It's raising our blood pressure, all of those really important life-saving things. But that's no good to us if the danger is constant. So then if that's ongoing, essentially the adrenaline kind of starts to dampen down, because that's your instant action. And then you get more of this cortisol. And the long-term stress is very much mediated by cortisol. And so we've then got, instead of adrenaline foot on the gas, we've got essentially cortisol, which is like a car idling at really high revs. And that exhaust is essentially inflammation that's then being generated by long-term cortisol. So cortisol short-term, fine, dampens down inflammation, etc. We might know about hydrocortisone and corticosteroids and all of those things that we use for the immune system. But long term, it's really damaging. It's actually catabolic, starts breaking down tissue in the body. And, cortisol's had a really bad rep in the last probably 5-10 years. It's very much needed. We need it to get out of bed in the morning, etc. But we don't want it hanging around for any length of time.
And funny you say that about cortisol. I mean, obviously, we were working together. I had the Lingo blood glucose monitor on when I went into anaphylactic shock in September, and they put me on steroids for a week. And as far as my understanding, steroids is a big kick of cortisol to kind of give your immune system a boost.
Yeah,
because to calm down that inflammation,
dampen it down. Yeah, exactly. Essentially, yeah.
And to see how that affected my blood sugar. And like you said, that's probably a whole other conversation, but I felt okay-ish that week. But to actually read what was going on in my body through my Oura ring and through the blood glucose monitor, it was insane. Like, my blood sugar levels were literally off the chart for those 5 days I was on steroids. So yeah, it's pretty eye-opening to actually see that data in front of me.
And that's essentially what we're getting. We're getting that little boost. If you take that down to maybe like 1% of what you were getting with oral steroids, we're getting that boost every time we have a stressor, every time someone cuts you up on the road, every time, you have that unexpected bill, it's another boost. It's another demand on the adrenal glands. And the reason why that is so important with hormonal health is because, unlike men, who can pretty much exclusively create all of their sex hormones in their testes, women have to use their adrenal glands to a degree. So it's 80-20 split in terms of ovaries to adrenal glands when we're menstruating. And it's pretty much 100% once we're actually not ovulating anymore and not menstruating anymore. And, the adrenals have then really got to pick up the slack of what the ovaries were doing once that factory shuts down and there's no more estrogen being produced there, and we don't get the progesterone because we've not got the egg coming into ovulation and then the corpus luteum, which is what generates our progesterone. Once that stops, the adrenals have got to pick up the slack. Now, if they're busy dealing with cortisol, adrenaline, noradrenaline, they're not bothered about whether you've got hormonal balance. They're bothered about getting you out of that saber-toothed tiger situation. And so your body will always prioritize what keeps you safe. And I'm certain that you've talked about this quite a bit previously. That's your body's whole reason for being, to keep you safe, keep you alive. And so if it deems that actually it's more important to create this adrenaline and noradrenaline cortisol, then your hormones are last on the list. And so therefore that equals a very rocky menstrual cycle during the time that you're menstruating, but a very rocky perimenopause. And this is why we have an absolute, pandemic of women struggling with the perimenopause now, because women are more stressed than they've ever been in history for all of the reasons that we've talked about, all of the psychosocial reasons, nutrient depleted, sleep deprived, etc., etc.
And then we only have to look at, things like chronic illness and how it affects 80%, well, the people that are affected by it is 80% women because of the world that we live in. And also, all of this, it's understanding our cycles, and we are not just small men. We have our own stuff going on. And I think, as you said from that book, there's more complex stuff going on in us as women, and, the patriarchy, which, we could talk about all day.
Yeah.
But it's the kind of epidemic of chronic illness is almost a natural response to the unnatural environment that we live in. And you probably know how much I love working with Gabor Mate, his book The Myth of Normal, and I know you've said to me as well around normal, what our like normal parameters are in data. This whole idea of what is normal is not normal. It's a response to a pretty fucked up environment. So, there are so many of us out there looking at, okay, let's not keep living like this because it's killing us. It's costing us our lives, and we don't have to run ourselves into the ground. Life is not here to just stress ourselves out, pay the bills, and die. Like, we can do so much more than just those things, and we do not need to live so stressed out. So just quickly to finish, because I'm aware of the time as well, because we're both chatterboxes as well. We're both Jennies, we're both chatterboxes. I'd just love to hear if there's anything that you could suggest that could be supportive of, supporting our menstrual cycles, anything for people that are struggling with things like chronic illness, or anything that helps with things like executive functioning with us ADHDers. What can help us from a nutritionist perspective?
So I think, there's so much that we can do that they would be counted as the foundationals, but we miss them because we try and jump ahead to the things which have like shiny packaging and the 1% stuff, the stuff that's not really going to move the needle that much. But once you've done all the foundational stuff, you can introduce it in and then you get that benefit from it. So I would always go back to the foundationals, and that is that predictability equals safety in the body, particularly in a female's body. Men can deal with so much more unpredictability because of what we talked about there about how hormones are generated. Really, thinking about routine, sleep, meals, light is a really important one. I think we're getting a lot more traction on how much we are, beings of light, and, receiving light is so important for us, and at the right times, and how, we all know how destructive blue light is, but do we know how healing, getting that blue light in the morning is, for example? So I would look at, blood sugar balance. Blood sugar balance doesn't have to be super confusing and complex. It's just about fueling your body on a regular basis with the right foods. And the right foods are, like you said there, there's no normal, there's no standard. It's what works for that individual. And just making sure that those are as whole foods as possible. I don't live in, an aspirational world where we're not eating any processed food. But if 80% of your plate can be whole foods, then you're starting at a really great foundational point. I think we downplay the importance of sleep. The nervous system and therefore our emotions cannot be regulated if we are underslept. All of our hormones reset to zero when we sleep, and in particular our stress hormones. So we do not want to start the day with our cortisol half cocked and our adrenaline and noradrenaline. And we've all been in that situation where we've had a poor night's sleep, or we've had to get up super early to travel or whatever. And it just throws our whole day out because we just feel like we're craving carbs and sugar all day, grouchy, all of that kind of thing. And, that compounds over just a matter of days. It doesn't even need to be weeks or months. And sometimes it's a bit trite to say get better sleep, because people who don't sleep well are like, how? But there's lots and lots of tools and techniques to do that. And I think the biggest one is by making sure that your light is coming in at the right times and not the wrong times. We are absolutely entrained. Our brains are entrained via an area of the brain called the SCN by light. So we need blue light in the morning and we need red light at night. And the reason for that is because we want to have blue light from the sunrise and we want to have red light from the sunset. Our bodies are not as evolved as we think they are. We are very much still in caveman times, but we're in a modern technological world. Caffeine is a biggie. If you're feeling rough and you're feeling exhausted and you've got no energy and you're, struggling with chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, whatever it might be, you might be propping yourself up with caffeine, but you're not doing yourself a service by doing that. So it's not a case of just stopping it dead. Please do not do that. You will make yourself feel horrendous. But it's about timing, and it's about choosing the right caffeine for you. So whether that's coffee, whether that's cacao or chocolate, whether that's tea, and starting to just reduce your levels and get the timing right. Caffeine's got a half-life of 12 hours in our body. So what we have at midday is still in our body to some degree at midnight. In fact, sorry, I'm going to fact check myself on that. It's got a half-life of 8 hours, but it's got a quarter life, therefore, of 12 hours. So a degree of it is in your body. It's still when you're in bed, essentially. So if you're struggling with sleep, then caffeine before midday, absolutely, but never on an empty stomach, and always after breakfast. I would always recommend that, particularly if you're listening and you've got hormonal dysregulation. It's the absolute catalyst for dysregulating female hormones is having coffee on an empty stomach.
Oh, wow.
It's almost guaranteed that hormones will be dysregulated. There's very few people I know who can actually tolerate coffee on an empty stomach, because it's basically cortisol on top of your cortisol with nothing to buffer it. So we want to use caffeine as an ergogenic aid, essentially, to bring in focus and things like that. And if you find that caffeine, particularly if you do have ADHD, if you find that caffeine really helps you with your focus, then bring that in at the time when your focus is starting to wane, mid-morning, that kind of thing. Looking at nutrient depletions, so I would always say test, don't guess. I'm such a big proponent of blood testing because otherwise you're just shooting in the dark. So the most common nutrient depletions I see are B vitamins, vitamin D, magnesium, omega-3s, and any one of those will have a huge bearing on hormonal production, including serotonin, dopamine, adrenaline, noradrenaline, and female hormones, but will also have a huge bearing on all of those things that we've talked about already. So the blood sugar balance and sleep and things like that, if you haven't got those levels right. And then I would always say, curating your environment. And whatever that means to you as an individual, we all have that thing where we've compromised on something. We've compromised on maybe something going into our weekly routine that we'd really not rather do. We'd rather rest. We've all got that thing where we're compromising on, something to do with our, maybe the commitments that we make to friends around us, or, our environment from an energetic perspective, how much energy we spend with people. So curating your environment and making sure that you're working in as much as you're working out. So if you are, spending time with people, making sure that they're actually filling up your cup, your heart, essentially, rather than being draining on you. That's a huge one from a hormonal balance perspective, because as you have spoken about lots of times, I know we hold on to a lot as women and we suppress a lot as women. And you have the power to create and curate that environment around you and the people around you. And they should be feeding into all of this and nourishing you in that way. All of those other things you can do till the cows come home. But if those things aren't right in your life, then they won't land as well as they possibly could.
Yeah. And it's so interesting, your answer to that question, because so much of what you have just said, I have an entire module of this inside of Heal Good, going through, sleep and your environment and who you're around and how you're spending your energy and what your energy, like all of this stuff. And it's so interesting that it's fundamentally the same advice that most of us would give, but it's just, yes, interesting to see it from a nutrition and hormonal perspective as opposed to, a nervous system perspective that I would put everything through. But our nervous system and our endocrine system are not separate. Exactly. They're different systems in the body, but, they all interact with each other. So if something's out of whack, it's going to knock on and affect other stuff. Yeah. So, thank you so much for sharing that. And for anyone that is interested in hearing a little bit more, and also the deficiencies that you mentioned, I think you literally just went through all of my supplements that I'm on. So obviously it's a common one. Yeah. But I have found working with you and obviously hearing all of this really, really helpful for myself, because there have just been a few things just out of whack, and, running a blood test to actually see what's going on was really helpful. So if anyone is interested in maybe working with you or hearing a little bit more about you, where can they find you? We'll put some stuff in the show notes anyway, but for anyone listening, what's going on? Where can they find you?
Yeah, so I'm probably most active on Instagram. So on Instagram, I'm at yum_nutrition_UK. My website has a few videos as well. So I talk a little bit about what the process looks like if you do work with me, what you can expect. I always think that it's nice to kind of bring it to life in a video. So my website is yumnutrition.org. I'm available on my email for any kind of questions that might come up following this. So that's jen@yumnutrition.org. And I also do have a Facebook page, and it is just as active in terms of posts on there as my Instagram. But I tend to have a lot more engagements and chats and things with people on Instagram for whatever reason. I think it fosters a better community. So my Facebook is Yum Nutrition and Wellness. So www.facebook.com, Yum Nutrition and Wellness.
Cool. We'll link it all in the show notes. And thank you again for the work that you do. Thank you for sharing everything. Thank you for supporting me. And thank you for helping, anyone that's been listening that has found this helpful. So thank you so much.
My absolute pleasure. Yeah, I do really feel, so privileged really to be able to share this message and give people hope. And I really hope that people have taken some essences of what we've spoken about today and get little sort of glimmers of hope in various areas of their health that they might be struggling with.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, this stuff is so important. Thank you.
Pleasure.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Calm Your Nervous System. I hope you found the conversation as interesting as I did. If you would like to start healing your nervous system, I have a free energy diary available just for podcast listeners, which will really help you see your blind spots about how you're spending your time and your energy. Find it at jennyadamscoach.co.uk/podcast. Find out more about me and somatic coaching in the show notes below. See you next time.